Are you a big fan of science fiction films from the 1980s? Well, stick around because today I'm going to go over my top 10 favorite 80s sci-fi movies on physical media. So let's rock. Hi everyone, I'm Fuzz. Welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to focus on a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is science fiction films from the 1980s. I am a huge sci-fi fan. Having grown up in the 70s and 80s, I was able to experience many of our most adored sci-fi classics firsthand in the theater as a kid. So I've always had a lot of love for these films and fond childhood memories of seeing these films with my dad at the theater or sometimes with the whole family. I consider the late 70s and 80s to be among some of the most innovative and groundbreaking years for sci-fi film. It seems like Star Wars changed everything. Now, Stanley Kubrick had done some pretty groundbreaking stuff himself in the late 60s with 2001, but Star Wars was really a game changer for the sci-fi genre at large. And I think the 80s delivered some of the best sci-fi films we've ever seen. So I'm going to lay out my top 10 favorite sci-fi films from the 80s. There will also be some honorable mentions, but I'm actually going to save those until after I'm done with the list. I actually feel honorable mentions usually should be after the end of the list rather than at the beginning, just so we don't ruin any surprises, right? Now, the criteria for me choosing these films is not just based on how much I actually like the films, although that certainly plays a huge part of it, but they all have to be on physical media. And not just any old physical media, but at least 1080p Blu-ray quality or better. In my mind, DVDs can't be on the list because I don't really view them as a viable, palatable, legitimate part of my collection. They're like the black sheep of my collection. So this will only be for titles that are available on Blu-ray or 4K disc. I'm actually going to go through these fairly quickly today. I don't like to spend too much time on any one movie. And you'll discover with me, I don't like to give too much out about the premise of the movie, even if it's a movie that we've all seen a million times. I figure there's always someone out there who hasn't seen it and who would prefer to not have it spoiled. So whenever I go into the plot synopsis for these films, I usually try to keep it very basic and just the fundamental premise. Because when I watch a movie, I like to personally know as little as possible going in. I want to know if it's a genre I like and the general premise, but any details, I personally don't like to have too many details going into movies I've never seen. And so I pass that on to you guys. I try not to spoil anything in any of the reviews or top 10 lists I do. So starting off at number 10, we have 1985's Back to the Future. Gotta love it, right? Michael J. Fox, classic stuff. Now, I'll admit I kind of struggled with this one a little bit because it's hard for me to view only the first film as a standalone film. I really feel like when you're watching this series, you kind of have to watch all three of them together because it's all one big story. That said, this was an amazing film in 1985. It's both funny and endearing, and you can just never go wrong with Michael J. Fox, right? So great stuff. Back to the Future, number 10. And I also want to mention that this 4K restoration looks absolutely incredible. These are reference quality discs in this set here. This is so if you don't have Back to the Future on 4K, I'd highly recommend it. At number 9, we have little Arnold here with The Running Man, 1987. This is actually a pretty deep film. There's actually a lot of good stuff in here, a lot of subtext, a lot of kind of social commentary and political commentary. This film has a lot of relevance to our modern day society, more than you might expect. In fact, when I was watching this, I hadn't seen it for many, many years before getting this 4K. And I was surprised at just how much I connected with this film relative to our current social climate. Very interesting stuff. For number 8, I chose 1981's Outland with Sean Connery. Such a great film. This one I've seen so many times. And interestingly enough, though, I don't actually have this one on physical media myself. It is available on Blu-ray, and it's a Warner Brothers title, so I've been hoping that maybe we'll get a 4K pretty soon, and I've been holding off on buying the Blu-ray. It's a great kind of industrial sci-fi film where it's got an element of realism to it. It takes place on a mining colony on the Jupiter moon Io. It's kind of a dark film. It just has a lot of grittiness to it. And it's actually one of my favorite performances ever from Sean Connery. I love Sean Connery in this film. It is a title I have a digital copy of, and so that's probably why I haven't felt any hurry to go pick up the Blu-ray, especially knowing that, you know, it's always possible a 4K release could come at some point. I've been hoping with Warner celebrating its 100th anniversary that we'd see a lot of cool titles come out on 4K this year, or in the next couple years at least. So I'm hoping Outland's one of them. For number 7, I chose Kurt Russell and John Carpenter teaming up for 1981's Escape from New York. And pardon the reflection, I got this one in a nice plastic cover here, so we get a little reflection here. But I do love this movie. Such a great film. This is one of those ones that I feel is great for repeat viewings. I never get tired of watching this film. It's got some great classic moments in it. Kurt rules. Kurt Russell is awesome. I'm a huge Kurt Russell fan. He's one of my favorite actors, along with Denzel Washington. And I'm a huge John Carpenter fan as well. So this was always going to be solid gold for me. And I never get sick of it. So yeah, number 7, Escape from New York. And at number 6, we have the 1982 Ridley Scott classic, Blade Runner. Now, interestingly enough, this film is not one that I appreciated as much when I was younger, which I suppose makes sense, right? I mean, I was a kid when it came out, so I didn't really appreciate it to the extent that I do now as an adult. There's a lot of good stuff in here, a lot of subtext and political, social commentary, as we often get in these kind of dystopian societies, or these futuristic societies where everything seems a little bit darker. This is a masterpiece from Ridley Scott. The visuals are just stunning on this film. I mean, let's face it, nobody does sci-fi like Ridley Scott, right? And Rutger Hauer, the perfect villain for this film. Rutger Hauer's performance is so iconic. And I would also say Blade Runner is another title that looks just stunning in 4K. So if you haven't checked out the 4K restoration of this title, wow, you're in for a treat. So yeah, Blade Runner at number 6 for me, 1982. And moving on to number 5, we have yet another incredible 4K restoration, and that is 1987's RoboCop. Arrow Video put out this particular box set. Amazing box. And yeah, the restoration on this is just awesome. It's a great film all the way around. Paul Verhoeven, another film with a lot of good social and political commentary, a lot of great subtext. Some of it's pretty in your face and over the top, but that's what makes it so cool. So if you haven't ever seen RoboCop, you are missing out big time. So number 5 is RoboCop for me. Okay, getting into some of the real heavyweights now, right? So for my number 4, it is John Carpenter's The Thing. Sorry about the reflection again. Again, I like to protect certain cases, or I like to protect certain slipcovers with these plastic coverings. So unfortunately, you get a lot of reflection. But I absolutely love The Thing. Another stellar performance by Kurt Russell. Really an all-star cast in this film. Just an amazing film all the way around. Like I said before, you can never go wrong with a little Kurt Russell and John Carpenter, right? And this is just an absolute classic. One of the greatest sci-fi horror films we've ever seen. And by the way, it's worth noting that with this particular release, this is one that I frequently cite as one of the absolute best 4K discs on the market. This really is a demo-worthy, reference quality release. So I would fully recommend checking this out on 4K if you've never seen it on 4K. At number 3, we have The Empire Strikes Back. You knew there had to be a Star Wars film on this list, right? Well, this is the one. This is, I think, considered by many to be one of the greatest Star Wars films. Even better than the first original film. So yeah, I am a huge Star Wars fan. I've always been a Star Wars fan. I saw all these films in the theater when they first came out as a kid. It was just this amazing, magical experience. So yeah, Empire Strikes Back, number 3 for me. By the way, if you're enjoying the content, do me a favor and please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell as well. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Okay, I'll admit these final 2 were really tough. I mean, really the final 5 were tough, but the final 2... these are pretty close for me. So number 2 is, for me, 1984's Terminator. It was really hard to decide whether to put this one at number one or my next one, but the other one won out ultimately. But I am a huge James Cameron fan. This is a classic. I saw this in the theater with my dad when it first came out, and it really left an impact on me. I was just blown away by this film, and it stuck with me all these years later. Classic Arnold. You got Bill Paxton in there. You got Michael Biehn did an amazing job as Kyle Reese, and of course Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor. So this is where it's at. And for my number one, it is another James Cameron film, and that is Aliens from 1986. Oh, I love this film, and I actually like this box set. Now, this is one that we definitely need a 4K release of, don't we? Along with several other Cameron films. But I ended up buying this little box set edition just because I thought it looked cool. I liked the cool artwork on it and the kind of metallic look to it. And the fact that it came with, some postcards. It came with some, I guess we call them lobby cards. And it came with a little book. But this is a great edition for what it is. It's Blu-ray. That's the best we've got right now for this film. So that's what gets on my list. But this film is not just my favorite sci-fi film from the 80s, but this film and Terminator are probably my two favorite films of all time, period, from any era. So I'm a huge fan of this film. You can probably even see my Bill Paxton Game Over Man shirt. Game over, man! Game over! I've always loved how he cracked his voice on the second Game Over there. But yeah, huge fan of Aliens. So that's it. My number one, Aliens. Now, I do want to get into a few honorable mentions real quick. You noticed I didn't put both Star Wars movies that came out in the 80s on my list, so we got to put Return of the Jedi just because I have such a childhood connection to this. I love this film too, even though it's not as good as Empire Strikes Back. I still enjoyed it, and like I said, I saw it in the theater. So, but I didn't want to put two Star Wars films in my top 10 list because there's just so many great sci-fi films from the 80s. I didn't want to have Star Wars take up that much space on my list, but have to at least mention it, right? Also, E.T. I love this box set. This is 4K. This is the 35th anniversary edition. It's got a little lenticular lenticular faceplate there on the box set, and it's a rigid box, side-loading box. And this is actually a really nice edition. I was pretty pleased with this, and I liked it better than the 40th anniversary edition. So. But yeah, E.T. you can't mention the 80s without mentioning E.T. And it may not be my personal favorite, but I feel like it needs to be mentioned just because it's such an iconic film in our culture. So yeah, E.T. Also, The Road Warrior, right? All the Mad Max movies are a lot of fun, but The Road Warrior definitely it's a good dystopian post-apocalyptic flick. And that came out in 1981, but just a fantastic movie. I really like the Mad Max series, but The Road Warrior is my favorite from that whole series. Also, The Final Countdown. This is one you don't hear a lot about, but this is an incredible 4K restoration from Blue Underground. And I saw this movie, another movie I saw in the theater with my dad as a kid. It's a fun time travel kind of movie. So it's definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen this old gem with Kirk Douglas and Martin Sheen. I can't remember who else is in it. And the 4K restoration, this may very well be the best 4K release that we've seen from Blue Underground. It is a stunning restoration. The quality is excellent. So check it out, Final Countdown. And finally, I can't talk about the 80s and sci-fi without at least mentioning The Abyss. Unfortunately, I couldn't put The Abyss on my top 10 list, according to my own criteria, because it's not available on Blu-ray or 4K. I do have this special edition DVD that I do not watch because the quality is so terrible. The Abyss is long overdue for a 4K release, but it is apparently supposed to be coming sometime this year. So if I'd had a Blu-ray or 4K release of this, it would have made my top 10 and something else would have gotten chucked from the list. But but according to my own criteria, I couldn't do it. So, but I love this film. It is a fantastic film. So I had to at least do an honorable mention for The Abyss. So that about wraps it up for my top 10 sci-fi movies from the 80s. I hope you enjoyed this list. Feel free to leave your comments or feedback down below. And thank you for tuning in. I'll see you soon.